He is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. English professors like to catch the errors that students make in their term papers, and they love nothing better than to catch mixed metaphors. There's actually a group, the Friends and Survivors of Calvin College English Department, who collected a list of mixed metaphors and posted them on their website. Things like this: he swept the rug right under the carpet. She's burning the midnight oil at both ends. It was so cold last night I had to throw another blanket on the fire. It's time to step up to the plate and cut the mustard. She's robbing Peter to pay the piper. Keep your ear to the grindstone. Ooh, that sounds painful. And sometimes you got to stick your neck out on a limb. Well, the two main stories in today's text provide some mixed metaphors as well. The first is about fishing, and the second is about shepherding. And when you put together, you come up with something like what? Fishing for sheep? Or shepherding fish? The metaphors may be mixed, but together they can provide a wonderful balance for the church's ministry. When we review the events of the previous chapter, chapter 20, we see that Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to Mary on first Sunday, that Easter morning. And that same day, the Easter evening, he appeared to his disciples, but Thomas wasn't with him. And then a week later, he appeared again when Thomas was with him. Our story in this chapter, in chapter 21, takes place sometime after that, but we're not told precisely when. 7 of the disciples were gathered together in one place. And I think perhaps we can suppose that maybe they seemed a little confused about what their role was in this post-resurrection time. They had no idea how they were to carry on their ministry after Jesus' resurrection. Even though Jesus proved his resurrection to them by appearing to them, they were obviously so different that they didn't know quite what to do. Perhaps they had a conversation that may have gone something like this. Nathanael might have said, "We saw nothing of Jesus from Sunday to Sunday during that first week after the resurrection, and now he has disappeared again. When are we going to see him alive again?" And Peter might have replied, "I have no idea. In fact, I'm getting a little frustrated with his absence. It was easy enough to follow Jesus around during his earthly ministry, but what are we supposed to do now? How do we function when he just pops in here and there, now and then? And furthermore, I'm tired of waiting. I'm going fishing." And they say, "We will too." They were perhaps eager to return to something that they knew, something with which they were familiar. Well, perhaps this night of fishing meant that they had given up their new vocation and were returning to their previous way of making a living? Or was it merely as a night stress reliever, not unlike the desire that many people have today to go fishing? They just wanted to get away for a while. And often a fishing trip is just that. It's an excuse to get out from under the chores around the house, to leave the stress of the workday world behind and return to nature. Now, of course, ordinarily, and the text doesn't say this, but there would also be a cooler of beer or something. But anyway, the text doesn't say that. But the 7 of them spent all night fishing. Now we can imagine that this was probably hanging a lantern over the side of the boat and then taking turns throwing out these big circular nets and pulling them in. And they did that all night long, and they didn't catch a fish. They must have been more frustrated by daybreak than they were the night before. But in the morning mists and fog, they heard a voice calling to them from the shore. And at first they couldn't make out this lone figure, but then they heard what he says, "Have you caught no fish? And cast your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." Like most fishermen, they were tireless in their pursuit of fish. Clear Lake is a very popular fishing lake. They have tournaments there, bass fishing, catfish, even carp tournaments. And it's all catch and release, but and in the last several weeks there have been a lot of bass tournaments. And they start at a particular time, and even though I'm, like 2 blocks from the edge of the lake, when it's time to start, because all of these 300-horse motors start out and push these $60,000 boats down the lake to where these people have probably already pre-fished, so they know there are fish in that area, but they want to get there before anybody else does. So their $60,000 boats and their $50,000 pickup, they bring a lot of money to Lake County. And that's one of the things that's at risk with the lack of rain, as it is in many areas of our state. Because if the lake level gets much lower, they will have to close the boat ramps, because people would run off the end of the boat ramp, and that can damage their trailer or their boats. Well, not only do they pay a lot of money for boats, they also pay a lot of money for lures. So they have two of the toolboxes. They have tackle boxes on these boats that are filled with hundreds of dollars worth of lures. And they're always trying different things until they find one that works, and then they keep using that same one again and again. But the disciples were surprised when they cast their nets on the other side of the boat, and they caught a lot of fish. And then they finally realized that it was Jesus on the shore. Well, what do we make of this post-resurrection fishing expedition? It seems to reflect back to the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he found some fishermen and said to them, "Follow me and I will make you fish for people." Mark chapter 1. And this analogy represented Jesus' earthly description of the work he was calling them to do. They were fishermen, and he was calling them to fish for people. Now, these disciples had likely felt that this was an apt description for the ministry with Jesus. And there were times when people would flock around them like schools of fish in a feeding frenzy. But what would be their job after the resurrection? They were confused, no doubt, about Jesus' off-and-on appearances. What were they supposed to do without him? Well, this experience is an acted-out parable, not unlike those of the Old Testament prophets. The message is that they were to continue to fish for people, and their post-resurrection catch would be far larger than any that they had had when Jesus was with them physically on earth. Notice that from the text, and this is an interesting detail, that somebody bothered to count the fish. 153. Where did that number come from? Well, of course, there are people that have always been interested in numerology, and many ancient scholars attempted to decipher the meaning of the number of fish caught that day. Cyril of Alexander said that it was a symbolic number, 100, meaning the fullness of the Gentiles, plus 50, representing the remnant of Israel. and 3 representing the Trinity. Augustine discovered that 153 is the sum of all the numbers 1 through 17. That was clever. And then he proposed that 17 was a symbolic number representing the 10 Commandments and the 7 gifts of the Spirit. St. Jerome suggested that there were 153 fish because that were that there were 153 different kinds of fish in the Sea of Galilee. And therefore the catch was a symbol that the gospel is for everybody, every kind of person in the world. Well, if we accept Jerome's idea, then this fishing trip meant that the disciples were to become missionaries to the whole world. And that is, in fact, what they did. They would still fish for people, but their catch now included every kind of person, and their catch was miraculously large. Well, today, we are still called to be missionaries wherever we are. Our number one task is to find creative ways to cast the net and to draw people to Jesus. Our baptism is our diploma. Pentecost is our ordination, and the resurrection of our Lord is our fishing license. The second metaphor from our text comes while the disciples are enjoying this wonderful breakfast of fish and bread that Jesus had prepared for them. And of course that raises all kinds of questions to our Western mindset. How did Jesus do this? Did he have a bag full of charcoal and some matches that he could light them with? I've seen pictures where they would take fish and simply run a stick up the gullet and then poke the stick in the ground over the fire, that was the way they cooked the fish. But where'd the bread come? Did he make a pit stop at Safeway on the way to the beach? It could be that Simon Peter was maybe a little uncomfortable during this meal. Perhaps he was still trying to deal with his own guilt over betraying Jesus 3 times before the cock crowed on that Friday a few weeks ago. That's when Jesus addresses him directly. Simon Peter, do you love me more than these? And yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs. Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Tend my sheep. Simon, do you love me? Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Feed my sheep. 3 times Peter affirms his love, and 3 times he is charged with the personal care of Jesus' flock. And asking the question 3 times, Jesus seems to be asking if Peter will be his disciple and follow him no matter what the cost. Jesus is alluding to the price of discipleship, both in the word love and in the use of the shepherding metaphor. By entrusting the care of the flock to Peter 3 times, Jesus is bringing up, the full range of duties that a shepherd has: pasturing, protecting, searching out for the strays, caring for their injuries, providing shelter, leading them to water. The church today succeeds or fails on how it does with these 2 mixed metaphors: fishing and shepherding. A church cannot live if it does not go fishing. Without the work of evangelism, the church will wither and die, just as a body without nourishment will atrophy. Most churches are better at shepherding than we are at fishing. We do pretty good at feeding the lambs, at tending the sheep, of taking care of of the needs of the people of our church family. We care for one another. We minister to our members. In fact, we get uptight when people miss church for several Sundays in a row. We do pretty good at shepherding. But what about fishing? How many of us are guilty of envy about the large crowd that we had on Easter Sunday? Wasn't that fantastic? Say 50 people. Well, what if we had 153 people? We'd be full to the gills. Wouldn't that be fantastic? That would be so great. And we see those people coming to church, and we wish we had that many every Sunday. We wish for a catch of 153. The resurrection empowers us to go fishing for people. And if each one of us invited someone to church, we could double our attendance in a week, instantly. But you don't catch fish if you don't go fishing. These two stories might be seen as mixed metaphors, but they provide a healthy challenge for our church. Shepherding and fishing. That's what the church must be all about. So let's fish for sheep and shepherd the fish. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.